There is something that follows you. Most people feel it before they can name it. A low-grade pressure that sits underneath daily life. A sense that the future has already been spoken for, that tomorrow's hours belong somewhere before they have even arrived. Some people feel it as anxiety, some feel it as numbness. Some have simply made peace with it the way you make peace with weather. But the thing itself is the same across millions of lives, and it has a name. Debt. And before we talk about interest rates, before we talk about mortgages or student loans or national debt or credit scores, we need to ask the question that is almost never asked. Not what is debt in the technical sense, but what is debt actually? What kind of thing is it? Where did it come from? And what does it do to a human being and to a society when it becomes the invisible architecture of everyday life? Start at the very beginning, before money, before markets, before any of the structures we currently call the economy. Human beings lived in small groups. They hunted together, gathered together, survived together. And in that context, something very natural happened. Someone had more than they needed today. Someone else had less. The person with more gave to the person with less, not as a transaction, not with terms attached, but as the ordinary movement of care within a group where everyone's survival depended on everyone else. This was the first debt, and it was not felt as debt the way we feel it now. It was felt as relationship, as obligation in the original sense, not burden, but bond. The giving created a connection between two people that persisted through time. I gave to you when you needed it. You will give to me when I need it. The debt was the thread that held the social fabric together. The anthropologist David Graeber spent years documenting this, and what he found was striking. Debt, in its oldest form, is not fundamentally economic. It is social. It is the way humans kept track of their obligations to one another. It was memory, encoded in relationship, about who had done what for whom, and what balance remained to be restored. This matters because it means debt began as something human. Something that emerged from the reality of interdependence, from the fact that no single person can meet all of their own needs, and that living together requires a constant flow of giving and receiving that never perfectly balances in any given moment. So what happened? How did this human thing become the pressure that sits underneath millions of lives? How did the thread of relationship become a chain? It happened through a series of steps, each of which seemed logical from the inside, and whose combined effect was to transform debt from a social bond into a financial instrument. From a record of human relationship into a commodity that could itself be bought and sold. The first step was formalization. When societies grew large enough that you could no longer know everyone personally, informal social obligation was replaced by explicit agreement. I will give you this now. You will return this plus something more by a specified date. The plus something more is interest, and interest changes everything. Because when there is no interest, debt remains roughly symmetrical. I gave you something, you returned something of similar value. The relationship restores balance. But when there is interest, the relationship is no longer symmetrical. The person who lent is not simply returning to where they started. They are ending up ahead. And the person who borrowed is not simply returning to where they started. They are ending up behind. The debt has become a mechanism for the transfer of wealth from borrower to lender simply through the passage of time. This is not a marginal observation. This is the central mechanism of modern finance. Wealth moves upward through debt, not through theft, not through violence, though both have historically played their role, but through the quiet arithmetic of interest compounding across time. Look at it plainly. If you borrow money to buy a home and pay a 30-year mortgage, you will pay the bank roughly double what the house cost, maybe more. The second payment, the one beyond the principal, is pure transfer. It is your future labor given to the institution that extended you the credit. You worked for it. You earned it, and a significant portion of it flowed to someone who simply had money to lend. Multiply this across an entire economy. Across mortgages, student loans, car loans, credit cards, business loans, government bonds. The total volume of debt in the modern world is not measured in millions or billions. It is measured in hundreds of trillions of dollars. Every dollar of that debt has interest attached to it. Every dollar of that interest represents a flow of value from those who borrow to those who lend. And those who lend are, by definition, those who already have. Debt at scale is not just a financial instrument, it is a distributional mechanism. It is one of the primary ways that existing wealth concentrates further over time, not through anyone doing anything illegal or even unusual, but simply through the structural operation of the system. Now look at what debt does to time. This is something that is rarely examined, but that shapes everything about how indebted people experience their lives. When you have significant debt, your future is already partially owned. The hours you will work next year, and the year after, and the year after that, a portion of those hours are already spoken for before they arrive. You have sold forward. You have borrowed against a future self who had no say in the transaction. And that future self wakes up every morning already behind, already working partly for the debt before they are working for themselves. This changes the quality of a life in ways that do not show up in economic statistics. It changes what risks you can take. You cannot easily leave a job that is draining you if the mortgage depends on the salary. You cannot start something new if failure would mean you cannot service the debt. You cannot take time to think, to rest, to reconsider, because the clock on the debt does not pause while you do. The indebted person is, in a very precise sense, less free than the unindebted person. Not dramatically less free, not in chains, but the range of motion is narrower, the options are fewer, the pressure is constant, and this is not accidental. A person who must service debt must work. A workforce that must service debt is a reliable workforce. The economist would call this labor market stability. The honest observer might call it something else. Now go to the level of nations. Because the same mechanism that operates in personal finance operates in geopolitics, and the consequences are larger. When a country cannot pay its debts, it does not simply go bankrupt the way a person does. It enters negotiations with creditors, international banks, the IMF, other governments. And those negotiations have terms. The terms are called structural adjustment. Cut public services, privatize public assets, open markets to foreign competition, reduce wages. The indebted country does not simply owe money, it owes compliance. The debt is the leash. This has happened repeatedly across the global south, across Latin America, across Africa, across Eastern Europe after the Soviet collapse. Countries that borrowed to develop found themselves unable to repay, and the conditions of repayment remade their internal economies in ways that benefited creditors more than citizens. The debt was the mechanism. The mechanism worked as designed. You are seeing the same principle that operates in the mortgage operate at the level of sovereign nations. Debt, at sufficient scale, is power over the future of the borrower, and the future of the borrower includes their choices, their priorities, their autonomy. So what is debt? At its origin, it is a record of relationship, of obligation between people who depend on each other. In that form, it is human and necessary and even beautiful, in that all bonds between people are beautiful. But as it has developed through history, through formalization, through interest, through the commodification of the debt instrument itself, it has become something else. It has become a mechanism for the structuring of human time and human choice in advance, for the pre-purchasing of future labor, for the concentration of resources toward those who already have them, for the extension of power across borders and generations. The person who borrows to survive is not making a free choice. They are making the only available choice within a structure they did not design. And that structure was not designed with their flourishing in mind. It was designed to function. And it functions, the question is for whom? When you look at debt clearly, not as a moral failure of the borrower, not as a conspiracy of the lender, but as a structural feature of the system with predictable effects, you begin to see why it is so central to how the modern world actually works. Not as an anomaly, not as the operating system. And once you see the operating system, you are no longer entirely inside it, you are looking at it. That is where understanding begins.